Welcome to Doc Secret, the show where we uncover the playbooks, strategies, and stories behind the most successful dental and medical practice owners and the companies that serve them. This show is all about building the best practice. Whether you're a dental or medical student dreaming of private practice, a seasoned doctor looking to grow or sell, or an investor exploring the healthcare space, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Kevin Carl, and in today's episode, we're diving into trauma, healing, and the future of behavioral health, including a look at electromagnetic brain pulsing. Let's get started. Welcome to Doc Secret. I'm joined today by Dr. Marlon Rollins. Dr. Rollins is a distinguished licensed mental health and clinical counselor with over 2 decades of experience leading behavioral health and addiction treatment, holding leadership roles as both CEO and COO at prominent psychiatric and addiction care institutions in California. With a PhD in educational psychology, a master's in counseling psychology, and a bachelor's in psychology from Ball State University, Dr. Rollins blends strong academic credentials with deep clinical insight. Ordained as a minister at age 21, he brings a uniquely compassionate, faith-informed perspective to his work, shaped further by his personal experience as a suicide loss survivor following his sister's passing. Dr. Rollins is the Chief Clinical Officer of Recovery Dynamics and Hollywood Detox based in Los Angeles, California. Driven to dismantle mental health stigma, Dr. Rollins is a self-published author of Healing the Impoverished Mind, Building Resilience Through Adversity, and Dr. Rollins has just released his second book entitled Resilience Between Pain and Purpose. He has also served on the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline Steering Committee, among other leadership and advocacy roles. Dr. Rollins, Marlon, if I may, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for having me. Glad to be here.
Marlon, you've led major treatment centers and worked across multiple states, but your story begins with a very personal tragedy. Could you share how your sister's loss shaped your path in mental health?
Yes. And thank you again for, just asking. I think when you're in the healthcare field coming from a personal place, understanding that you're connected, not just by career, but that it connects our family members. And yes, I lost my sister, Amber Rose, to suicide in December of 2013, on December 31st, actually. And she was a very proud nurse. In fact, we both worked in the same hospital for a period of our careers. We worked on the behavioral health side. She was a transitional care unit nurse and actually ran her own home health care business. And for a time, at the time that she died, I was a director of operations back in Indiana for an inpatient psychiatric hospital, as well as a crisis director. And as a clinician, that changed my perspective of wanting to not just be a provider, but to be in a position to make a difference in the field, because I saw my sister, as we understand, as a first responder, as a nurse, unable to navigate effectively the healthcare system and the stigma, the barriers that she faced to get her nursing license back. She struggled with addiction and a mental health condition, and just getting support as somebody who had never had encounters with the behavioral health system before, and then the outcome for her to end her life. We understand that providers are at higher risk for suicide, and to see her fall into that trap, it was incredibly painful and hurtful. So it compelled me to say, how do I get in a position to do something more about this? Like, it was answering the question why and how could this happen? So it challenged me to elevate. And from that point forward, I started seeking out leadership roles, which compelled me to do training and development and come out to California to seek more opportunities to be CEO, COO, president of some of these companies, because I realized that leadership changes the culture within these healthcare systems. So how do I get from here, from being a clinician to being in a position of leadership, and dedicate my work and bring my sister's kind of purpose, if you will, that was shortcut with me, and also to be a caretaker of other providers, nurses, therapists in some of these institutions.
Well, leadership is not just a clinical title for you, but it's also evident through your writing. You've written about what you call the impoverished mind.
Okay.
I'd love to understand what that phrase means to you and why did it become a book?
Well, the healing the impoverished mind came from two places. One, the book title, Healing the Impoverished Mind, came from one part of ministry, which was kind of an underpinning, the spiritual development for me. And the second part of it was just clinical. Recognize that the impoverished mind means someone who is experiencing the threats of life, and you're living in a place of um, scarcity. And it creates a mindset of like just being in survival mode all the time. And that shifts the way that we perceive and experience the world. Um, so recognizing like, how do we heal from that? If you've experienced trauma, if you've gone through adversity in your life, how do you shift from the survival mode to living again and being able to relax oneself again and being able to thrive again, as opposed to having that mindset kind of implode on you that only focuses on the short term? So for me, that's how I understood the impoverished mind, is that when we feel threatened, when we feel afraid, whether it's real or not, there's a sense of, I've got to survive. And that changes the way that we interact with our relationships. It changes the way that we interact with our workplace. Think about 2020, and then it just everything became you became afraid of everything, right? So, and a lot of people, we came out of that kind of stuck. So that's kind of an example. I wrote the book post 2020 to talk about healing the impoverished mind. Of like, how do you move out of that scarcity, fear-driven threat? This like, I don't know what's going to happen to me, right? That moment is like, if I stand too close to someone, right, am I threatening their life? So it's those kind of things, and all of that feeling of threatened began to bubble up in our society and our culture when we were going through this global crisis. So it's an example of like a shared experience of trauma, and how many of us were stuck in like, how do we re-enter into living again?
Mm-hmm. And you've clearly taken your writing and your leadership roles into this advocacy and
Mhm.
trying to impact more lives successfully and for the better. I'd love to understand how your early work as a therapist informed your style, if you will, as a leader, and now very much as a speaker. Today, you're out in the market. I'd love to understand how this early work had an impact on you as a leader and speaker.
And great question. My initial part of my career, when I was first starting to practice, had my master's degree, and I was working on my doctorate degree, and I was a school counselor, if you will, a school a therapist, right? Not the guidance counselor, but the therapist, in a school for gifted and talented students. Because there was a recognition that even with the very smart kids, that there were issues of anxiety and depression and high pressure, and it impeded their performance to really be successful, right? And so I was that person that these kids who were trying to regulate the pressures, the nervous system. There was issues with cutting, all this other kind of thing, suicidal ideation. So here I am integrated into a school. And so that was my early work. And then I got my doctorate, and then I moved into the prison setting. And I saw what it was like to be integrated as a practitioner into the prison setting. Here again, the priority is for safety, but here therapy was also part of the rehabilitation, if you will, of those inmates. And then I moved from that to working in the emergency room in the hospital setting. And then ultimately, I got into roles of director of access to care, like to a front door of a psychiatric hospital, of a crisis centers. So what that taught me as a therapist is that at each location, somehow behavioral health was integrated into these settings, right? And then working at the community at large, I was a director of a psychiatric hospital that was integrated now into a larger 5,000 employee employee healthcare system, 7 care hospitals, and we're the psychiatric hospital. So it dawned on me as kind of putting this together, and then also I had done a lot of early work in ministry, that in every setting, the church setting, school setting, the prison setting, the hospital setting, the healthcare setting, there was something about behavioral health that was kind of marginalized behind what was most important to the overall goal of that agency, right? School, it was graduating kids, right? Prison, we wanted to contain people. In our emergency room, we were trying to stabilize people. In behavioral health, clients who came in, they were not welcomed. It wasn't like, oh yeah, come on in with your, schizophrenia. It's like, it's one of those patients again, so it became like an irritant. Even to a certain degree, some of that played out in the school, but I worked with a teacher base that was more open to having these conversations because they really wanted to help these kids be successful. So that shaped me in the way that I do public speaking because I realized that in every situation, there's something around mental health that people don't understand. They know it's important, but they don't know what to do with it. So I take that role on as an educator and be able to speak. So like, okay, well, this for healthcare workers, I have to talk this way because this is what is important for that culture. This is the culture of the school. These are what teachers are dealing with, right? These school threats and school shootings and am I safe? And how do I deal with kids' behavior? In the prison setting, the kind of the people who are forgotten, what does that look like to those administrators? And then you get into the workforce, like how do I support a nurse? Right? And the providers who are going through, who are at higher risk that we really don't talk about their needs either. So those different settings, being able to kind of carry the mantle of behavior health and brain health forward and seeing what we're doing and what we're not doing, kind of the marginalized and having equity in our healthcare systems, uh, made me more adaptable, if you will. I could take on a different perspective of the environment that I was working in.
Well, you're an ordained minister, a therapist, CEO, author, man of many titles, right, and many capabilities. How do these roles intersect in your approach to healing and service? And is there a common thread that cuts across those roles in terms of how you bring your offerings, your capabilities, your point of view forward?
Great question. I think, as a minister and as an ordained elder, kind of starting there, it was seeing people come into the church as kind of like this was the last resort many times, like everything else has failed. And that put me in a role of being a spiritual leader, of bringing hope, comfort, healing. Then as a therapist, it became, well, okay, well, actually now I'm a practitioner and I'm going to carry the spiritual mantle on, but now I'm going to bring forth evidence-based practices that are going to help people who maybe have struggled in maybe the religious sector with the stigma of anything related to anxiety, depression, or addiction, and now be able to embrace them and bring on that spiritual element without the judgment that they maybe have experienced even trauma with into now an executive who now I'm leading a team of 200, 300, or 400 employees, right? And sharing my experience with them as a storyteller to set a mission. So to be that mission inspirational driven leader is how I think the ministry from being a practitioner to being an executive to say, okay, what's our mission? Because when you become an executive, you have to think about the business acumen side of it, right? Are we turning a profit? Is there a margin? But you can't lose sight of like, we're not just making t-shirts or products and widgets here. We are actually talking about the health and well-being and the recovery, the restoration of people's lives. And so to be able to speak from kind of the heart, if you will, of what we're really doing here in the healthcare space. This is not about just a part of the body or a product. We're dealing with souls of people. And so that common thread of being an inspirational healer, if you will, with a mission to help people really grow and transform has been the thing that I think has carried me with a common thread. Um, So yeah, I mean, I'm grateful for the journey. I did not expect it. It's one of those things of like, oh, I always thought I would be like a teacher and researcher because I did that for a time too. I thought once I got my doctorate, I'd be teaching, other students and, working in research. But life events, my sister's passing pulled me deeper into actually the field itself, and into administration, but I still carry the research. So now I'm like, okay, now I'm a science-based leadership. I'm looking at KPIs, key performance indicators that are not just, outcome measures, but are also financial, that are also about access to care, about time, et cetera, to really get a good picture of like, are we doing well? Are we reaching our goals? So yeah, that's kind of how I approach, the roles that I take on now.
Well, clearly multidimensional, and I appreciate you bringing that to life for us. I know that you have spoken on the topic of suicide prevention nationally in a number of major news outlets, CNN, NBC, Wall Street Journal, just to name a few. What do you wish more people understood about suicide, grief, and recovery?
Um, to allow it to be a part of the conversation. I think suicide, grief, and recovery, there's a lot of stigma. Like we don't want to talk about those kind of things. Right. And that's the problem. Like if we don't talk about something, how do we really understand it? What we do is we end up with this mystical driven ideology about what all these things are. So what I find in the recovery space is like that's a community. It's the recovery, people who are in recovery or sobriety versus the normies, right? And it's like this divide of almost prejudice, and us not wanting to be labeled. Like I don't want to be labeled that. I don't want to be labeled. Um, the stigma around suicide, like not understanding the pain that somebody might be in, understanding that this is a place of lost hope and fear, like the fear of living is greater than the fear of dying, right? And so it doesn't make a lot of sense to us because again, this is a shift in mindset for someone, and then the process of grief. We have this idea of like kind of get over it when it comes to um, trauma or loss. Like you got your 3-day off for your bereavement period, right? And then you come back to work, everything's fine, right? Like, no, actually, I have to live this entire year differently without this person, with all these milestones. And I'm not sure how to do it, especially when you have a close relationship with this individual. Like, how do we move forward, right? And honor them. But, there's this kind of pressure to say, oh, culturally, get over it, just move on. And it's interesting. Some things we never want to forget, like always remember. But there's other things like let's not talk about that at all. Let's not talk about the shame. Let's not talk about anything that makes us uncomfortable to actually figure out where we can improve. So it's interesting that some subjects are, oh, let's talk about this, but the other ones are like, this is dark and shame. Let's keep it. And this is why, we've seen, problems with addiction escalate, right? We've seen problems with suicide rates go higher and higher. And when we have suicide rates go higher, guess what? We have more people with grief and loss, right? I remember when I lost my sister, I was like, oh, 2013, suicide rate was this, and I want to fight to bring it down by 15%, according to the healthcare administration, that we want to drop that number. Well, that's not happened. We've gone the opposite direction. We've seen suicide goes rates. It used to be suicide death happened in our country every 13 minutes on average. Okay. Which sounds like that really happens every 13 minutes. Now it's down to every 10 minutes. Okay. And for every one person that dies, there are at least 6 people that are impacted by a suicide death. So now you have 6 people sitting in the shame of the grief about what happened, right? For every one person who has died by suicide, there's 26 people who have attempted suicide. So if you start doing the math and realizing that at one every 10 minutes, that means 26 people every 10 minutes making a suicide attempt. So we don't look at that. Well, what's happening to our psychiatric hospitals? Where are the services to help all these people in suicide crisis, right? Let's not mention that 54% of people who die by suicide die by a gun. So this notion that it's almost easier to get access to lethal means than it is to get access to treatment and to help, let alone overcome the stigma. So I said a lot there. I'll stop, but that's
Well,
that's heavy stuff.
it is heavy stuff. And let's talk a little bit about you mentioned access. I'd like to use the term slightly differently. You talk about access to healthcare, access to therapy. What's broken in how we're currently delivering behavioral healthcare in terms of access?
Well, the idea of medical necessity, we don't think about prevention. And excuse me, we don't think about prevention in that way. It's, I would see many patients who would come in, or clients or family members who were trying to get access to treatment and or even addiction recovery services. And they say, well, you're not suicidal enough. You didn't do anything bad enough to meet medical necessity, right? You're not drinking enough. Oh, that was last week. You didn't drink within the last 24 hours. You didn't take enough substances. And literally the family members are upset. Like, well, do I need to go home and do something first just to get help? So the barrier is, one, of making it accessible. The second of all thing of actually getting the treatment. Then let's talk about affordability, right? And am I going to get fair treatment, if I have this insurance versus this insurance, right? So we've made, let alone the stigma, right, of just doing it. So the whole push for like 988, the suicide lifeline, that's somehow being pulled back for some groups that are more high risk. It was the idea of making the number easier for people to, remember. And when my sister died, for instance, it was still a 1-800-273-TALK, right? And if you remember 1-800 numbers back in the day, like, again, this is 2013, a 1-800 number for suicide. Okay, like, wait a minute, like, what are we doing for that? And now, mind you, it's very popular, 90s, 80s, it was effective, right? Those numbers were lower, but just picking up the phone and calling somebody, if you're in a suicidal crisis, are you going to remember 1-800-273 what?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the push,
What year did 988 come into existence?
that dropped in
Roughly?
July of 2000 and quote, maybe 20 or 21. Um, it's relatively new. It might be a year before COVID or after. I can't recall exactly the release. And there were some glitches and people were upset about it. Like, oh, you called a number and you're being put on hold. Well, think about the funding. It's not like the same way that our tax dollars work for 911. If you call 911, you want the phone to be answered. Well, that's because there's a whole infrastructure behind 911, right? Well, 988 is a volunteer system. Okay, so there's not the money that backs a 988 call system by each state per each county and where you're located to get routed to somebody who's trained, who's available, right? Plus a text line. So it doesn't have a 911, backing, like that emergency. And what were people called? They call 911. But what would happen when you call 911 when you're in a mental health crisis? The police show up. What does that happen when the police show up? 10 things can escalate. There's already guns. It could add more threat to the situation to escalate further. And we know that certain groups are more vulnerable when it comes to law enforcement, and certainly when it comes to where you may live. So it was the notion, and 911 operators, they're not typically trained when it comes to mental health. They're going to, you've heard 911 calls. We've all heard them before. Very wonderful people. It's just that the system is not set. Who do I deploy? The police. Sometimes some systems look at deploying fire. Fire department doesn't maybe have the same stigma, but they can do some things. But again, fire department for a mental health crisis doesn't make a lot of sense either. Some states took on crisis teams, the actual more mobile crisis. Some people paired police officers with therapists in the field. So, there wasn't a standard, if you will. So anyways, a lot more complexity when it comes to service delivery, and the idea of like, we're already in a crisis. So like, how do we get in front of that, right? To be more proactive and more preventative.
So you've mentioned two, I think, big barriers. One's the service delivery. The other one, to go back to a term you used a moment ago, which is stigma and shame, right?
Yes.
Why do stigma and shame remain such powerful barriers, especially in men's mental health, communities of color, and other groups that may be at risk?
Right. That's so important. One, it's lack of information. Like stigma stays around when we don't have good information about something, right? We kind of make it up. And, the social ideas and cultural things are very strong. They become almost values. And for men in particular, um, men we know have a 4 times higher rate of suicide completion than women. And the idea of help seeking for men is not something that we're really good at. We don't like to ask for help because many times our manhood, our idea of being a man is contingent upon, right? I can figure this out on my own.
Yeah,
And
this overly self-sufficient
yeah,
mindset, right? Yeah.
absolutely. And not recognizing that there's so much power and bravery and courage for men asking help. Men were typically, we grow up, we don't typically have a language to talk about our feelings. And if we do, somebody makes fun of us and calls us feminine. So we kind of just shut it down and shut it down and shut it down. And it becomes this imploding thing. And we feel like when our lives are not valuable, we lose our worth. So those kind of stigmas that are deeper in many times with communities of color and diversity can be problematic. Now, mind you, older white men have one of the highest suicide rates than any other group in our country. Sadly, we've seen other younger men, specifically Latino men and Black men, those rates have gone up higher as well. So they don't fit within kind of disparity. And if all things were equal, every group would look exactly the same, but they don't, right? There's real differences. So that tells us something, that something is happening different for each group. And so we should study that to understand how do we prevent that rather than just react to it. What's happening in our community is data. If we learn about specifically what's happening with this subset of men or women, or this race or culture of people in this area or in this state, to be more tactful about how to intervene. So those are more generalized statement. Those are the common trends, though, that men and boys will have higher rates and less self-help seeking behavior.
Well, let's shift to maybe some of the talk about how we help. And
Mhm.
you've been a leader in this space, not only in fact-based and research and evidence-based approaches to this, but also a spiritual component as well.
Mhm.
Tell us about the Core Power program. Why did you launch that program, and what kind of impact are you seeing from it?
The core program is called Coaching Our Resilient Executives. And for me, at this point in my career, I realized as I've gone on this journey and working with different hospitals improve their systems, that it was common that we would take a manager or director and they would say, "Oh, you're really good at your job. We're going to promote you," or, "You should be a VP or you should be the next executive." And what I learned is that many times there's not a lot of training that's available to these executives. They come in and there's a lot of burnout, there's a lot of turnover in leadership. So if you're going to have consistent trends, the places that I've seen where they've had the greatest success, for instance, like the Henry Ford healthcare system, they had a zero suicide initiative that prevented suicide for, I think, over 2 years in their behavioral health product, which is phenomenal to think about that. Well, that all came from leadership. So, through my own training, because I've gone through everything from the student group training to every institution that I've having coaches myself. So I've developed this program called CORE, Coaching Our Resilient Executives. It's a 12-week program to help organizations say, "Hi, I've got an up and coming leader. How can I help them understand business acumen, how to understand mission, how to understand KPIs, to really help them understand their core values so they can build a stronger organization and sustain it and sustain themselves, because it's a lot of pressure. So, it was one of those things like, I wish I had something like this when I was, you know, when I was going through, and I was like, you know what, this is it. So I created what I felt I needed most. And so I've been helping other leaders and VPs and COOs and up and coming CEOs to be a support. I used to do like support groups for CEOs, and we would get together and we would talk about what was going on, and how to show up. And I was like, you know what, I'm doing this in some way. Let me formalize it. So that's where core came from, core power.
Well, that's exciting. I know it's lonely at the top, and it's hard often to find resources to educate and be more effective as a leader. You've been both a clinical and administrative leader. You've launched this core
Mhm.
program. I'd love to see if you could give us a little taste of that. How do you bridge the gap between, let's call it, business efficiency and
Mhm.
human compassion in mental health care?
It takes a tremendous amount of courage to lead with purpose in the world of business. And I think any good business leader will tell you that it's their core mission and values, people becoming a part of something that creates great organizations. So to be able to make good decisions that are value led, get the buy-in of some of the greatest institutions we've seen, you know, uh, and I don't want to name a whole lot of them, but your big ones that are out there, and many of them sang songs. It was a culture. It was you felt like you were a part of something. Let's say Google, for example. Remember when you worked for Google, like you felt like, I'm Google. Well, that came from leadership, right? And now Google is it's a verb, it's an action. So that understanding that people, especially in healthcare, because that's tech, but people want to be a part of something meaningful. And when you can really step forward courageously and create a clear mission and vision that has purpose and outcomes, then understand the back end of your business and what it looks like and decision making and hold true to your values, you've got a great business. And you can keep coming in as a clinician, or maybe as you're speaking out to, medical providers or dentists or whatever. Like, you never lose the reason that you signed up for that, but the business world of it can change the way that you make decisions. Like, oh, we got to have a profit margin. But when you begin to shift away from that, of the core values, you can lose sight of that. Your business will start to fall down. It's like, 'cause you're chasing the wrong thing. Nobody gets excited about a P&L, okay? So so, in fact, they're like, "I don't wanna deal with that," and in healthcare, it just feels, like, really icky. Right, but we know that it's important because one of the barriers of treatment and care is affordability and financing, and we have to reinvest and we have to build, so you have to think about those things, about how and when to invest and how to move forward when you talk about growth and expansion of ideally good quality programs. And what makes quality programs and quality products is good values that are willing to take risks and be courageous, but don't lose sight of their core missions.
Mhm. Let's say you were speaking right now, and you probably are, to practice owners and clinicians, and you're thinking in how to advise them as they look at their mission and vision, let's say over the next 5 years.
Right.
What are the top two or three behavioral health trends you think that they should pay attention to?
Ooh, um, probably top 2 or 3, definitely technology integration. That's number 1. Like, I know there's some criticism about ChatGPT and AI tools, but they're here and they are not going anyway. And I remember the pushback when telehealth launched for just therapy, right? But when 2020 came and people couldn't get to a therapist, it just became like, we have to do it this way. So, but early in my career, I remember like, oh, we can't do virtual. Like, no way. So there's already a little bit of mindset of like, okay, is AI going to replace the therapist or a doctor? No, of course not. So understanding that as if you're looking in the next 5 years, think about these tools are going to be here. How do I integrate them into my core mission to drive it, to make it more efficient, to make it more effective? Because people and consumers are going to be using them. So let me pre-build them into what I'm doing. Just accept it. Like, we're only going forward. So you can't go back, period. So hopefully if you make the right decisions, and we need people who like that, who are the craftsmen and women of the craft to understand how to build this into their practices. So uh, sign up for that. Just get ahead of it. Look what the trends are and make sure you're doing it. The other thing is, I'd say the whole health modality. Like in our practices, many times where everybody has segmented, like you got, here's the heart, here's the kidneys, here's, orthopedics, here is the brain over here, and everybody's like doing all of their parts. But now I think you're going to see this notion of whole health integration. And when it comes to behavioral health, I think the first one you're going to see more of is the gut health and brain health. Okay. And bifidobacterium and how it impacts the brain and serotonin, all those kind of things, and understanding how all the body has a certain rhythm that's tied to our central nervous system. The heart has a rhythm, our breathing has a rhythm, our gut has a rhythm, our brain has a rhythm. And when we have arrhythmia show up in any of those systems that go too fast, too slow, or whatever it is, we're going to have problems. So using the body, understanding the mind, you had to be thinking about whole health. We know that even dental health and infection there is a disaster for any other part of the body. What's going on here?
Yeah, there's a
So
lot of news around that, right? In these, the microbiome and its
Mhm.
impact, the
Mhm.
vagus nerve, I guess it
Yeah.
is, the impact to brain health.
Mhm.
You you said something interesting there. I'd love to dive into it. You talked about this rhythm
Mhm.
that these different systems have. It's probably natural at this point to talk about electromagnetic brain pulsing,
Mhm.
given the rhythm that you mentioned. Could you explain for our listeners what it is and why is this potentially the next frontier in personalized behavioral care?
Yeah. Now, I'm so excited about this technology, and it's not new in the sense that these services have been around for a long time. Okay, so this EMBP, electromagnetic brain pulsing, is a combination of an EEG, which, if you're familiar with the squiggly lines that people take and put the thing on their head and the cap, and usually it has to do with sleep studies, right? Or you've had a seizure. Okay, so it uses an EEG that understands that every person's brain has a unique rhythm and oscillation in all parts of their brain, the front to the back. Okay. And it understands how to look at that rhythm, that our brains are constantly firing, our neurons are have a rhythm. Think about like playing a guitar, right? So when I get an EEG, I can look and see, look at what is your rhythm telling me? And so if you look at the signals that are happening, we're talking about signal processing of everything that from your hearing to your vision to your taste is all based on signals that are coming through our senses, and providing feedback of like how we feel and what we should do, sometimes completely unconsciously. So EMBP looks at the EEG and uses an AI technology and a formula, an algorithm called an FFT that converts what we understand as the time of that's happening into wavelengths. So that wavelength gives us a frequency, and all of us have a unique frequency pattern that's ideal for us. And so the treatment involves taking the EEG, which tells me how your brain is currently in rhythm. How's it oscillating? Does it work all well together? Okay. And then provides a treatment through a pulsing, through a machine that we've all known for TMS. It's transcranial magnetic stimulation, which has been FDA approved for the treatment of depression since 2008. So this is an evolution of what was kind of ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, but now EMBP is a completely non-invasive, okay, and there's no implants. It's taking an EEG and then understanding what your rhythm is and then making a suggestion to the brain of what's a more ideal rhythm for your brain by putting it into what's called more of the alpha frequency in the brain. So you can see, instead of going from diagnosing, you're looking at a rhythm. And I said, oh, your brain is telling me this looks like the experience of anxiety or depression or autism or, and you name it, traumatic brain injury. Or whatever it is, we can see how the brain has been impacted or how well it's functioning based on the signaling from the EEG, and then create a program to make a recommendation, if you will, through giving a magnetic pulse that's in code to your brain to optimize that part of the brain that feels like, and then you as a user, like, oh, wow, I feel better now. It's more clarity.
Interesting. And you mentioned, if I caught it right, that
Mhm.
there's an AI component. There's
Mhm.
an AI powered brain mapping, if you will. If I've got it wrong, please correct me. If that's correct, how does that enhance treatment? Like what's different
Mhm.
for the layman between EMBP, traditional TMS, and even medication? Could
Mhm.
you explain the difference there?
Yeah. So, um, one medication, think about is purely chemical. Okay. So our brains are electrical chemical. Our brains are thermodynamic. That's why there's heat. Our heads get warm. So we understand it. And because there's a lot of energy that is released up here in our head, right? So it stays warm. You look at an MRI, you can see. So a TMS makes an assumption that everybody has the exact same signaling. Okay. It's set at a standard delivery of a magnetic pulse. So repeated, okay, resonance. Okay. And then with the EEG, once I understand how instead of your brain ticking, let's say at 10 hertz, like making this assumption that you're supposed to be at this rhythm, your brain does something like this kind of pulsing. It's more what we call stochastic resonance. Okay. So now instead of using a repeated tapping, if you will, that assumes you're like everyone else, though you're not, you're unique. All of us are different. We're within a range. Now I know exactly what's going on with your brain through that EEG. And now the AI element is doing the math very quickly. So processing the data much quicker than we could, doing an algorithm, the FFT, fast Fourier. It's developed by Amy Noether, who is a renowned physicist, using that algorithm, right, that talks about conservation of energy, okay, and then tailoring the resonance, meaning now I'm going to tell the machine to, instead of doing the assumption of it just a standard 10, it's going to go at a different millisecond rate, okay? So that treatment, you get for 30 minutes a day using no medication, 30 minutes a day. We go to a clinic, if you will, that offers the services, put it over your prefrontal cortex, and you would receive that rhythm, if you will. It's like taking your brain to the gym for like 30 minutes and saying, hey, let's all the neurons, let's do this instead of this over here. And the brain is amazing, is that it will pick up, oh, this is a better signal. This is a better operating signal. So let's just say you've been through chronic stress. You haven't slept a lot. You've been taking drugs for a long period of time or whatever. You've been under a high amount of stress. You're going to feel that sense of fatigue where your brain is going to try to do what? It's going to conserve energy. It's going to try to, your brain doesn't really care about you. You are not your brain. Your brain is all about what's most efficient. So if it's feeling burnt out and you're feeling fatigued, it's going to turn off certain signals and just kind of slow down. And you, as the user of that brain, you're going to feel like, man, I just don't feel like myself. What's wrong? I'm feeling depressed. I feel anxious all the time. Why am I shaking? Or why can't I get out of bed? And you feel like you're flawed as a person, but you understand the brain is an organ. right? So once we have the EEG, we can look and see what's going on, and then the EMBP treatment that you do for just maybe a few weeks can give you a new rhythm, and we give you a whole kind of treatment protocol if you do to help optimize the outcome for the EMB. So really fascinating.
Wow. That's exciting.
Mhm.
I'd love to hear what types of conditions maybe thus far you've seen EMBP most effectively support. Is it depression, ADHD, trauma? What about geriatric
Ooh,
diseases, dementia, Alzheimer's? Could you shed some light on that?
yeah, those are big ones. Think about as ADHD is like so much talked about right now. So with focusing issues, having a hard time, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, right? So that's our name of it. But it can look away in the brain where their brain, you can tell like, oh, this person doesn't like your being able to focus or you're hyperactive, right? It becomes like a coping. It's like your brain is kind of turned up. So like we want to calm the brain down. So ADHD to help improve focus and calmness in the brain. We understand that some people are more susceptible to ADHD, traumatic brain injury, where they've been hit in the head, right? Now they are less coordinated. One of the things we see a lot of success with, just chronic insomnia. Like when people have problems with sleep and then they're taking drugs to get to sleep, you're drinking coffee to wake up every day. So insomnia in the brain, anxiety, seeing outcomes treating long COVID. There's some published articles around EMBP and an Air Force medic treating for long acting the COVID, that brain fog, a loss of sense and smell. Think about what happened in the brain during COVID. If you got it, you lost taste, right? Well, that's a signaling issue in the brain, and smell is a signaling issue. So when those neurons, if you will, become inflamed, well, they're just going to be not as sharp and distinguish things as clearly. So I'm not going to taste the charcoal coffee anymore because those were inflamed. So I don't want to distinct. So the EMBP, once we know that that's going on, we can treat and say, oh, we can turn those sensitivities back on and regain sense of smell and taste without medication. Okay. So some of those are some of the fascinating things that we're seeing. Now, when it comes to dementia, now I've worked with this technology was developed by Dr. Yi Jin, and he's been doing this for 40 some years, developing this technology. Brilliant researcher. Um, and he's seen one of the things that he talks about is, well, dementia is, think about a biological degrading of the brain, right? So it's not that it can do that because it can help, but you're going to see the brain is still starting to deteriorate from a biological level. Right, just as much if I was trying to give your vision back, you had impaired vision. Well, is it a vision because of the eye and what's happening with the retina or the shape of it? Or is it something in the occipital lobe where it's a signal issue, right? So I can fix the signaling issue so that you can have better, clearer vision, but I can't fix the eye structure itself, right? Same thing with the brain where we're dealing with, well, I can't, give you new cells, but I can improve the signaling. So better memory, better concentration, better focus, better recall. Because when you have more neurological power, you have more efficiency through signaling, then my brain feels better and I feel more effective in this vessel, right? So yeah, so there's a lot of research and pushing through to get FDA approval of some of these things, but it's fascinating technology to see what we can do with the brain now through EMBP.
You mentioned that the technology's been in development for years. What is it that's new now that's driving it forward? Is it the personalization of that and the AI powered brain mapping, for example? What's the combination of unique elements that are making this a really promising treatment now?
Well, it's the diversification of specifically using the EEG. It's the combination of those two together. It uses an EEG and a heart lead, EKG, because again, we're talking about brain and heart rhythm. Those are also in sync. So that's the key. TMS, there's no EEG involved. You just go in and it's a standard treatment. There was something else called MERT, same kind of thing. There's deep or a type of a deeper TMS that just goes deeper. What makes EMB special is because it is based on your EEG. And so if I get enough EEGs of this type of condition, I really understand what that condition may look like. And condition could be an addiction issue. It could be PTSD. It could be autism. So if I can study the EEG of multiple autistic patients, I can look what's the common denominator of signaling, if you will, right? So the issue is we have a lot of misdiagnosing out there from a clinician. I'll just look like, oh, it sounds like you have depression. But it's another thing when I, instead of using like my clinical like symptom based, I'm actually looking at signaling in the brain. So now with the EEG, yeah. So I know from what I'm really dealing with because of the signaling that's going on. And now I use the AI product to come up with that protocol that gives me what we call more alpha frequency that we want to optimize in different parts of the brain using this new tool.
Where do you see EMBP fitting into traditional treatment plans, for lack of a better term, especially for underserved or high acuity patients?
Oh, goodness. I see it as a method of preventative care, quite frankly. Right. So you're talking about not just the issues that you have. This is the coolest thing. Like I would get really excited about it. It's like, how do I want to optimize my brain and kind of do like a brain refreshing, if you will. Right. So I know the natural signaling of my brain's rhythm, then I could go in and almost get like a preventative instead of using drugs and alcohol. Right. I could do EMBP to help do some more preventative care or just to kind of gotta like optimize the functioning of my brain, and then you get into like high performing athletics as well, right? Oh, I really want to optimize, now we're going to treat the brain to help with maybe high performing athletes or the everyday person one day being able to say like, oh, I'm going to go to the EMB clinic and, I've got my profile built and I'm going to go in an outpatient setting and just go and do there for 2 weeks, like you would go get a massage. Right. So to me, that would be the coolest thing. It'd just be like, oh, okay, I'm gonna go get my brain, and again, it's not like you have to go under or anything like that. You drink some water and you have a few snacks, after treatment and, you're good to go. Um,
Wow. Well, I really like your metaphor of going to the gym for your brain. That
Mhm.
resonates with me.
Mhm.
We think about that physically, right? But we don't really think about it mentally, particularly in a proactive way, right? It's really when trauma happens or something else that prompts us to do that. This sounds like a really compelling way forward. Could you tell us about the organization that you lead and those that you're involved with? You mentioned some names here on the show. Who all is involved in bringing EMBP to a broader audience and a treatment platform?
Oh wow, yeah. So now it's worth. There is the center, kind of the headquarters is Epic Brain Center, which is actually located in Reno. In Nevada, they opened up a new clinic in Las Vegas, and these are outpatient centers that offer the EMB treatment. And there are a few more. The one treatment center that I'm working with right now is in Hollywood Detox, where we're bringing this service into a rehab setting to help the brain of understanding the impact of trauma and the brain for the people who are struggling with addiction and how hard it is to get off those substances because the brain's working against you. So I'm working with Hollywood Detox at Recovery Dynamics to bring in EMBP into the rehab center to help people struggling with addiction. The other two, Epic Brain Center that I mentioned that are in Las Vegas and Reno, are outpatient clinics, if you will, that, if you have some kind of brain trauma and you feel like you've tried everything, you should reach out to them and see if they have somebody in your area. But that's the headquarters, if you will, is Epic Brain Center.
That's great. I'd like to step outside of sort of the here and now and zoom back out and maybe talk to our audience that is listening to this and your journey, your leadership, and your insights. And I'd love to understand from you from a leadership standpoint, okay, what should mental health practice owners do to stay relevant and impactful as these new modalities emerge? I mean, to be on the cutting edge of something like this means that you're up and looking around and And what does that look like for you as a practitioner? And what would you advise people to be able to stay engaged, stay on the lookout, to stay relevant?
Yeah, do your research, go to the conferences, be open to, look in the direction of technology as much as you possibly can. And so that's one of the things that I think has been a disservice to the field of behavioral health is that we have siloed ourselves. Like we don't have conversation with these operators. We don't have conversations with Apple and Google the way that we should, the people who are advancing technology, to figure out how to bring those things forward. So once you bridge science and technology together when it comes to care delivery, then you're in a place of innovation. So as a leader, you want to make that as part of your cultural values, is to innovate and bringing science and technology together, because technology is not going anywhere. It certainly makes something like EMBP possible, right? It's a marriage of science and technology into treatment. So looking for any advancement like that is the right way to go. But there is a lot of controversy and stigma even around about issues of privacy and all of that kind of stuff, which also can be handled. Again, technology's not going. We'll just figure out what the solution is about how to keep it private and protect the individual. There's ways that you can do that. And these systems are constantly more complicated. So again, you just need to stay in front of it. So that's what I would advise clinicians to do, and leaders who are in this space, is to go to these conferences, get outside of the box of just going to your specialty, look more holistically to feel like, how could this work over here? Because that's where creativity, change, and innovation really begins to happen, is that we're putting things together. This is a combination of actually a psychiatrist, um, Dr. Yi Jin, and an engineer who does computer programming, coming together and figuring this out and being open to it and putting the powers together and saying like, oh, we can really do something to change the game here. So that's what makes this really exciting.
Well, that's fascinating and great advice. What advice might you have for, let's say, new clinicians? Maybe they're entering behavioral health today. Maybe it's somebody who is coming out of graduate school or PhD program. But let's talk maybe to those more junior in their career, especially those who are carrying their own trauma. Maybe it's loss, like you experienced with your sister and her passing, or some other trauma from their past. What advice would you give to them as they enter the behavioral health field today?
Yeah. Take care of yourself first, and I think that's common when it comes to healthcare providers, behavioral health. There's this notion of being rewarded for taking care of everyone else but yourself. Is we have to let go of that mindset, because if you're not well, you're not going to be as effective. I had to stop and go to therapy, get support groups, all that kind of stuff, to make sure that I could show up without the hindrance and without the pain. It took me a while to work through the grief. Even showing up to work and hearing the word suicide or seeing a nurse, it was difficult. So if you're entering the field with trauma, stuff from your past, from childhood, I think it's really good and responsible. And this is something that, as a researcher, is really important, is to do what's called like what we call a reflexivity exercise. It's very common in qualitative research, and it probably should have been done more. It's basically sitting down and talking about and writing out your personal biases, your experiences, right? And being able to present that forward or set it aside as you get into research, as you get into your practice, so that you're not coming forward with your own countertransference issues when you're trying to be a scientist, right? I think a lot of there's been, I think, misinformation that comes out because information gets skewed by your own lens. Be aware of it. Let it inform what you're doing. Don't let it bias what you're doing, right? And then it can be more purpose-driven rather than a hindrance, because then you get almost overly enmeshed, and it puts you on track for a lot more compassion fatigue and a lot more burnout right? If you're not able to step back and care for yourself as you get into this field. So, and and most importantly, be aware of the social determinants of health. And that's what I mean is like not everybody is the same. Like study that, getting the different perspectives, because if you're going to be in this field, you're going to take care of people who are different from you culturally, when it comes to their identity, all these factors. So understand what these social determinants are, so you can be more conscious, culturally conscious of what you could be facing, not in a way to stereotype people, but a way to understand that, oh, it's going to be different for this person. It's going to be harder. What are the barriers for this group that this group doesn't have? So I can be more of an assistant, so I can be more effective, right? The kid who's Latino coming in my office, what's going to be different from him to the Caucasian that comes in my office? What's going to be harder for them when they go back out to the cultural worlds, right? And don't make the assumption, understand like, oh, we're not all the same, right? So, I think people make fun of surgeons because surgeons they're just looking at the organ. They're not thinking about anything else. Like, oh, that doesn't matter. I'm just paying attention to this one organ or whatever. And that's kind of the joke. But no, be aware of the context of the whole body of that person and the whole culture that they're involved in. Sometimes it's this is just an example, but like seeing a client virtually, and let's say they're coming into my office all the time, but let's say that they can't now. So I'll say, let's walk around your house. Show me your room. Show me where your food is. So now I can understand a little bit like, well, shoot, there's no healthy food. Like, oh, you don't have a bed over here? So now we're in the house walking around. So I have a better idea of like what this person's really struggling. Here I'm trying to treat them for depression, but they don't even have their own bed. And there's only, you know, it, bologna in the fridge. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? So get a little bit more understanding about what is going on with your clients culturally, those social determinants of health. Like, well, no wonder you're having these problems. So it's an increased awareness, but before you be aware of someone else's, be aware of yours.
That's great advice. I'd love to dig in for a moment. You just released your second book
Mhm.
entitled Resilience Between Pain and Purpose. Could you tell us a little bit about the book? What is at the core of the message?
Yeah. So when you go through adversity, it's like between pain and purpose. Like, what's the middle ground? What's the in between? How do you get from painful adversity to finding something more meaningful, something more conscious? And so, in the book, I just help the reader kind of walk through what I call understanding resilience and how you develop it. Part of it has to do with emotional intelligence, but the notion of resilience is the ability to not just bounce back to where you were before, but actually how to move forward. So in the book, I break down what I call the growth codes. So in there's like these 4 specific things that I help the reader understand from a spiritual, from an emotional, from a relational aspect of how to move from adversity in those areas, or what I call minimum potential, to more maximum potential because of what you've been through. So a lot of us will go to the minimum potential spiritually, being in fear, emotionally, being apathetic. I don't care about anyone else. Okay. To physically retreating, not doing anything. Okay. And even our relationships, we become avoidant, or we're overly attached and we're afraid of abandonment, which is what I call kind of like the minimum potential in these 4 growth codes. So I help the individuals reading this book how to move from here to there. How do you get from this adversity, this minimum potential, which is conserves a lot of energy, to being able to make a huge difference in my life and the people's lives around me, so that I'm actually growing versus kind of sinking. And that's the transition of the first book, which was Healing the Impoverished Mind. But I give a form because life can be very complicated, as it should be. How do you navigate it? So I break it down with these 4 growth codes to help people understand how to make that shift into higher potential using adversity. That's the resilience between pain and purpose.
I'm conscious that so much of this comes from your experience in leadership,
Mhm.
clinical practice, certainly your educational background, et cetera. I'm just wondering whether any of this is autobiographical for you, because you have experienced trauma, but now you're leading in so many different categories, CEO, leader, clinical director, so forth and so on. Is it in any way autobiographical for you?
Oh, absolutely. So it's intentional in that way. It is autobiographical. These are non-fictional books that I tell my story, and the way that I was informed heavily by a lot of early reading, especially in African American literature, where I understood the power of storytelling. And in these books, I use myself as the character for you to walk in the shoes of what I'm doing and giving you like how to get from here to there and reflecting on your own adversity. Because I realize as I've helped thousands and thousands and thousands of people, not just directly, but indirectly through the organizations, seeing these common things that people struggle in these same areas, individual private practice, myself, I said, what a minute, how do I make this simpler? So that's where I birthed out the idea of growth codes, is to help people understand where they are and how to move from here to here. And so, yes, I absolutely use it, and it became an exercise for myself. And as people read the books and they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. And how did you do? Like they were inspired. And then the question, like, how do you do it? And I was like, well, I need to give it a how to. So the how to became the second book, which I feature in the growth codes. And, then I'll work on the next book and help people understand how to really tap into it. So the book is like a beginning, the framework. And then I do coaching with individuals to kind of help them really tailor in to like how to create the shift and actually use adversity to do greater things rather than be overtaken by it.
Well, that's fantastic. I mean, first of all, I look forward to getting my hands on it. But also I know that you are making a real impact in people's lives, and you have looked for ways to make that impact. It's encouraging and inspiring to hear that you found it, and you are making that impact. Marlon, we conclude each of our episodes with a lightning round of some quick
Okay.
questions designed for quick answers. Are
All
you
right.
ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
All right, so here we go. What's one non-negotiable habit in your self-care routine?
Sleep. Um, just quickly, absolutely sleep, because I would normally say exercise because I work out, but I realize how important sleep is. If it's sleep versus exercise, I'm gonna sleep. So restoring my brain is my sleep is only happens when your brain health is all attached to how well you sleep. So that's one non-negotiable. You have to sleep. For some reason, I grew up in an era where it was like, yeah, stay up all night and do an all-nighter
Right?
and don't sleep and don't
Yeah,
sleep and
that's
don't.
right.
We have all been hammered with that idea of don't sleep, and it's a absolute the worst thing you could ever do for your brain health is not sleep. So
I
sleep.
could not agree more. What book, and I'm going to challenge you here, that is not your own, what book do you recommend most often to clients or clinicians?
Okay, not my own. I would say there's a book. Let's see. I have it right here. Like The Body Keeps Score is probably one of the best ones that I recognize. Just people understand about that trauma and whatever happens to it. It doesn't go anywhere, right? These things are kept in the body. The body knows what the brain can't feel. And I think people understand that you're not your brain. Um, but the things that you experience have an impact on your body. And so it's so personal to us, right? Our brain itself, because we experience consciousness through it. So understanding that the body keeps score of what happens in the brain. So that's one of the books I definitely recommend for people to read.
That's great. What is one myth about suicide prevention that you'd like to bust?
That talking about suicide will cause suicide. There's no causal relationship at all. I would bust that all day. And I think it's a fear that people have. Oh, we talk about this, then it's going to lead to it happening. And that is not true. Ask the person if you're concerned about it. Hey, Kevin, man, when you're going through a whole lot in your life, and I've just noticed, have you thought about not wanting to live and not wake up? right? And just because I ask you that question doesn't mean that you're going to go out thinking about it. But the thing is, if you are thinking about it, Kevin, it's going to bring you to feel like, oh, somebody hears and sees me. It'll bring you out of that dark place. And even if you got defensive and said, "Oh, no, man. Oh, no, never. Not, way. How could you ask me something like that?" I was like, hey, I just care about you, bro. I just want to check in on you, make sure you're all right. So as long as you're good, but if you're not okay, hey, let me know. It's okay if to not be okay. So that's kind of how you approach it. You just keep respectful, keep curious, but bringing it up and asking so many questions is not going to cause it to happen. And that's been a big, big myth that stops people from talking about it.
Well, let's hope this show can help bust that. And I
Yeah.
appreciate you. I appreciate your answer. What's a favorite quote or scripture that grounds you?
Um, uh, there's always this quote from Romans chapter 12. It says, to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Specifically, be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of this minds, um, to show that good and perfect will of God. So I always think about that scripture because it's like the world gives us so much stress and says we need to be this way or that way to not be conformed by it. Like I said, I was telling you about sleep. Oh yeah, stay up all night. Here, drink this. Here, smoke this. Here, do this, do that. It's like, the world tells you all of these things that are terribly toxic for you and for your body and for your mind. So it says, be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that you can show what is that good and acceptable is the word, perfect will of God. And what I believe is that it's like to love, right? So you put all this stuff, loving yourself and loving other people is like, well, to be transformed by the renewing of your mind is like, oh, I have to think and feel different, and then I can be different. But if I get sucked into all of the next hooks of things, you get conformed into the world and you just almost feel like you're in like a robot mode. So you have to be in this world, but not of it and not succumb into it. So that transformation or healing and growth is yeah, that's the scripture for me that I always go back to.
That's great. I want to go back to follow up maybe on the question I asked a moment ago.
Mhm.
What do you say to someone who feels like they're losing hope?
Oh, um, if you're losing hope, I would ask the question, do you need to lose hope on that thing? Is it something you actually need to let go of? So one of the writers, Joseph Campbell, kind of inspired me when I was writing or doing a lot of public speaking. Is he would have this quote that would say basically, in order for you to, I'm going to butcher this a little bit, but in order for you to have the life that that's waiting for you, you have to let go of the life that you've planned. So sometimes when we're hoping on a relationship, we're hoping on this job, we're hoping on something that is almost hurtful. Like I just can't let go of this hope. But for many times when it comes to adversity, letting go of that hope to allow what's waiting for you to actually come is the biggest challenge. So I would say, hey, if you're letting go, sometimes you need to let go of that hope. I work with a group of men, and we were having this conversation that the idea of suicide is sometimes it's not like that you need to die, but something else does. Some part of you needs to die. So it can be symbolic of your growth, right? It's the courageous thing of letting go of something. So what's waiting for you can actually show up. So um, it's a matter of that process of coming into acceptance and that fear of being vulnerable that allows you to actually grow. So if somebody's losing hope, I would challenge them to see if this is a hope of something that they need to actually let go of, which it maybe kind of flips the script a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Interesting response. Yeah, I appreciate your words on that. If you could wave a wand and change one thing about mental health care in America, what would it be?
That that preventable, I say like that prevention is profitable. If I could change magic wand that to make prevention of these healthcare things, of these issues, profitable, because I think we really struggle with the idea of we profit off of sickness. We profit off of unwellness. I want you to be sick so that I can make money of you. I'll create a problem to treat the problem to make a profit. So I don't want to cure you. Okay. So if I could wave that wand, and I believe it's a wand that is waving, is understanding the value of how valuable life is, like when we are healthy, when we are well, when we are alive, and suicide rates go down, and people are not using drugs and alcohol to get through their day. We realize that their health is the most valuable asset to make us the best place to live, right? And the best father, the best mothers, the best sons and daughters is healthy people who are not burnt out. That preventative health care allows us to be as profitable as we possibly can, and not just financially, but, in so many other ways, because we're more produced. We're not in the jail system. We're not going to the emergency. We're not failing out of school. We're not getting arrested and pulled over for DUIs. There's prevention. Prevention is profitable. There you go.
Mhm. Well, that's a fantastic answer and inspirational as well. Dr. Marlon Rollins, it has been an honor, a pleasure, and an inspiration to have you with us here on Doc Secret. Thank you so much for joining us, sharing your insights and perspectives.
Thanks for having me.
If you liked today's episode, please like and subscribe, and most importantly, share this podcast with others you think may benefit from the Doc Secrets shared here today.